Warning! This following video contains casual discussion of major spoilers for Deadly Premonition. If you have any interest in the game at all, I suggest you put off watching this until you've beaten it. Thank you. Hello there, everyone. More importantly, hello there, Rising Star Games. I'm going to do something a bit different today. See, later this month, the special re-release Director's Cut edition of Deadly Premonition is coming out, and its publisher, aforementioned Rising Star Games, is looking for some audio-video submissions from fans of the game on why come they like it so much. Being an obliging type, and being someone who loves to talk about the things she loves and why she loves them, I thought I'd give it a whirl. First, let me talk about how I actually got into Deadly Premonition in the first place. I missed a lot of the hullabaloo that accompanied its original release, with the widely polarized review scores and the coffee and sandwich-related memes and pictures of York's glowing smile, but one of my friends, we'll call him Bonsai, didn't. He bought the game not long after it came out because, like most people, he had heard its burgeoning reputation of being so bad it's good, but he quickly found himself legitimately enjoying the game and was soon peppering references to it through our conversations. Not the usual meme-related stuff or asides to Zach, but things like how he loved the atmosphere of Greenvale or the attention to detail or the epicness of York's beard. I listened closely and thought the game sounded interesting, but it never made it much higher on my to-play list than a passing interest. However, all of that changed one night when I was having trouble getting to sleep. I decided to watch some videos on my phone to help me relax, but I didn't know what I wanted to watch. I think I'll watch a Let's Play, I decided. But of what? After flipping around on TV tropes for a while and happening on the page for Deadly Premonition, I decided what the hey and clicked on Super Great Friends LP. As soon as the game got to the opening cutscene, with York driving in the rain, working on his laptop, smoking, and having a conversation on his phone about the homoerotic, masochistic subtext in Tom and Jerry, I knew I had to play the game. There was no longer any debate. I stayed up even later than usual that night, watching up until the part where Thomas and his squirrel keys get introduced, which also included a memorable scene of York tearing across town and sowing destruction while casually ruminating on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Then I rushed out to my local game store to see if they had a copy. It was meant to be. There was one just sitting in the Xbox 360 section, waiting for me. I didn't have my own 360 at the time, so I roped my friend into letting me play at his house. So I guess it's pretty obvious then that one of the reasons I love the game so much is its sense of humor. So many people called the game so bad it's good at its debut, and while some of that was blamed either on the graphics and animation or the sound mixing, a lot of the statement was tied up in its absurdity. The FK in the coffee, the center sandwich, the references to Zach, the real-time beard growth. But in order to be so bad it's good, you need to be bad in the first place. And the thing about Deadly Premonition is, it's trying to be funny. And it makes it. York's Yorkish way of observing everything around him, Emily's scathing reactions to his nonsense, George's constant standoffish behavior and the way York just brushes it aside. Even the minor characters get in on the action. Keith's totally radical ghost stories, the General's gastrointestinal tales of war, Polly constantly interpreting York's actions as hitting on her, and Sigourney. Oh, Sigourney. Some games have such an obsession with being taken seriously that they're afraid to do anything that might make them look cheesy or juvenile, such as telling jokes. But humor is such an integral part of life that this seriousness is what makes them look most childish of all, like a kid trying too hard to be grown-up by awkwardly using big words or always having perfect manners. Yet once you get past the initial wackiness, Deadly Premonition actually has one of the darkest and most emotionally involving stories I've ever seen in any video game ever. And it wouldn't work half as well as it does without the humor. Think of the ending of the game. I've heard a number of people, including myself, say that the most difficult part of the game is saying goodbye to York at the end. Will we miss him because he was a stoic badass who never flinched and who fearlessly wrenched a bunch of zombies and then a raincoat killer in the face? Hell no! We're going to miss him because the game really made him feel like he was our friend. And it did that by making him laugh with us and by making him a funny, entertaining goofball who always found ways to make us crack a smile, either by nonchalantly pissing off his coworkers in completely hilarious ways, or by rambling inanely, yet fascinatingly about movies, utterly irrelevant to everything else. It's the fact that he's so disconnected and rude that makes his character work so well. Media in general, but video games in particular, are filled with the sort of character for whom life has not moved on since that one tragic event in their backstory. They either mope around the script, flailing angstily from place to place, or they seem to be completely devoid of emotions at all, with all the expression of Spock without the snarky charm. But York is a guy who's lived his life. He didn't let the death of his parents get in the way of his love of punk rock or 80s movies or junk food, and that makes it all the more surprising and sympathetic when he starts to crack and his emotions start to get the better of him. In fact, I think that's one of the things about the game that really gets me. It's surprising. Now, don't get me wrong, when I first played the game, I was deeply in love with all of the humor, from York's excruciatingly poor choice of dinner conversation to Emily's Amazon-style cooking, and I would have loved it still if it were just that all the way through. But I noticed there was a point, about halfway through the game, when my thoughts on why I liked it were starting to change. In particular, the scene of Becky's murder. Yeah, you know the one. Suddenly, this game, which I'd been viewing so far as a sort of an absurdist comedy with a creepy backstory, decided to blindside me with actual horror. I mean horror. Not the video game genre we call horror, where creepy things jump out at you from poorly lit corners and give you a bit of a start. I mean, honest-to-God, revulsion at what I was seeing in front of me, that anyone could be so twisted as to mutilate that poor girl and then string her up in such a fashion, and that sick sense of dread I got when I realized that she was still alive and suffering, and that she was not going to be for much longer. Suddenly things were at stake, and they were going south fast. Possible adultery going on at the idyllically 50s A&G diner? A chef and an art gallery owner are murder suspects? And that goofball Kaysen was a bigger player than the person actually in control of the game. Now I was sitting on the edge of my seat, tailing Nick after he left the bar, hurrying to get through the gallery's other world to find out what became of him and getting emotionally invested in the mystery. And after York's dramatic diving save to rescue Diane, after George's bungling show of strength, after almost losing Emily to that statue, that scene in the Galaxy of Terror. As they say on the internet, my feels. All of my feels. Chapter 13 and the revelations it brought were when I knew for certain that Deadly Premonition was unlike any game I'd ever played before. And it wasn't just the content of those emotional bombshells therein. It was the moment when I realized that here was a game that took itself not just seriously, but almost with dignity. It had a lot of dark, horrifyingly dark material, but it didn't flaunt it or try to show off how gritty it was being. Its characters had flaws and emotional turmoil, but it didn't latch onto those flaws all the time in a perceived display of realism. It treats its characters as people, with the good and bad in accord, and with many layers to them beneath that initial surface impression. Obviously, our 5 leads are the most nuanced, but think about how many people in the game aren't what they seem in one way or another. General Lysander's stories, maybe? The relationship between Harry and Michael? Even our first victim, Anna Graham, had a lot more to her than the airheaded image she projected of herself. DP is great at subverting expectations, both internally with its characters and externally in the way it goes from quirky and lunatic to sober and artistic without missing a beat. And since there are little bits of drama and little bits of WTF sprinkled throughout the whole thing, it never really feels like mood whiplash. The fact that the game pulls off such a tricky balancing act so well, with only a few missteps here and there, Super Saiyan Blanca, tells me a lot about the game's writing and the man behind it. Mainly, it's smart, and he's smart. Deadly Premonition is, on the surface, a really bizarre little game, with its extensive and ludicrously detailed world and NPC scheduling, flip-flopping genre, it's survival horror, it's open world, it's both, and Yorkagachi stat management. But taken as a whole, it becomes one of the best examples of telling a story through the medium of video games that I've ever seen. There's so much you can learn about the characters and the plot just by following the characters through their daily routine and seeing what they get up to. I'm sure most fans of the game know this by now, thanks to Welcome to Greenville's videos about it, but you can actually catch George wandering mysteriously around in the backwoods and napping with Thomas in the secret room in the Galaxy of Terror. Or you can see Thomas himself actually napping, no air quotes, in the storage room of the sheriff's department after the bar reopens, or see Emily at her exercise routine, or even drop in on one of Nick and Diane's many nights at the bar. Through the game's many optional conversations, you can also pick up on tons of backstory and exposition, such as why the timid Thomas even works at the sheriff's office, how the A&G Diner got its name, and why Diane specializes in tree-themed artwork. Some of the optional conversations even slip in little bits of foreshadowing, like the introduction you get with Lily if you seek her out before the town meeting. It allows the player to sort of mold the story as they go, experiencing it at their own pace and letting them uncover as much of it as they want to, and it allows for a depth of story that would be impossible in any other medium. As for the detailed world and York's basic needs, well, it helps everything feel more alive, of course. By making us take care of York, it makes him seem more like a real person, and that helps us like him and become more attached to him. For example, from my own experience with the game, the first time me and my 360-owning friend found one of Emily's cooking quests, we showed up in a scraggly pseudo-beard and a zombie blood-encrusted fly-hive of a suit. For the second and third ones, my friend forced me to ensure that York was clean-shaven and wearing a fresh suit before we set foot in Emily's house again, because he would not have our buddy showing up to a respectable lady's house for a nice dinner, looking and smelling like a hobo. Does the game care? Of course not. But did we care? Naturally. The game forcing us to look after York triggered a sort of fraternal instinct in us, such that we wanted to watch out for him as if he were a real person, even beyond the game's rudimentary stats. We wouldn't want one of our friends embarrassing himself by showing up ratty for a date, so we transferred those real person emotions to him. There was another incident later in the game, during one of the driving conversations, where York addressed me as Zack and admitted that he didn't understand women, and I, prompted by nothing but the game, launched into a surprisingly real and emotional speech to him on what he was missing and what he needed to understand. Amusingly, the real Zack ended up saying a number of the same things to him in the epilogue. With any other medium, you can scream all you want at the screen or the pages for the characters to not make certain stupid decisions, but video games are the only medium to actually let you make those decisions. As for the zombies, you got me there. I have to agree with the prevailing decision that they sort of clash with the rest of the game, but at least they provide some world building and build up to when you find out about the original massacre. But even outside of the game elements, the game script is still pretty great on the whole, and as clever as the rest of it. Sure, it has the occasional snare where something obviously went wrong in the translation from Japanese to English, but on the whole, it's jam-packed full of funny and clever lines. I mean, come on, how eminently quotable is York? And it has a pretty darn good vocal cast who do a great job with the material they're given, even when it is phrased a little awkwardly. Even in the stuff that isn't voiced, the game has a great sense of detail that adds to the world's verisimilitude. One of my favorite examples of this in the game is the Ingrams. On the surface, they seem like your typical comedy couple, utterly mismatched in every way, such that you wonder if they got married just to make the rest of the town feel better about their own relationships. But they're actually a really happy, loving couple. And if you talk to them throughout the chapters, the game actually goes out of its way to show why they're happy and explore some of the mechanics of their relationship. Things like how Keith thrives off his wife's support and always tries to be helpful and supporting and kind, or how Lily loves Keith's endless energy and sense of fun and loves to play along with him. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Deadly Premonition approaches the topic of relationships with more intelligence than a lot of other things I've seen in a good long while. It has good, stable, loving relationships like the Ingrams. It has breaking relationships like Nick and Olivia. It has relationships gone horribly wrong like George and Thomas. And it has relationships in bloom, such as York and Emily. I mean, when was the last time you heard anyone praise the romantic subplot in anything? Yet with this game, people do, because this game was smart enough to avoid a lot of the common pitfalls associated with romantic subplots. Emily, for example, is her own fully fleshed out person with her own life and personality, instead of just a hollow vessel for York's affections, and the two of them don't instantly fall for each other either. They spend a lot of time just kind of hanging out and chatting before they start to like each other, especially if you do have lots of lunches at the sheriff's office and drive places with Emily and chat her up now and again. And how many of you have noticed that, when she's in a good mood, Emily makes movie references just like York does? It may not be a grand, sweeping romance in the stage tradition, but it doesn't have to be. It just makes us like their characters and like the way they are on screen together, be they sniping at one another or having a heartfelt chat about family, so that we want to see them get together without the game having to force them in that direction, which is also part of what makes that ending so heartbreaking. After it ended, Deadly Premonition left the kind of impact on me that few games have ever achieved. Few anythings, really. For at least a week after I was done with it, my mind kept drifting back to the plight of Zack, all that he'd endured, what lay ahead of him, and the York-shaped hole in his heart that I now shared. Deadly Premonition made me feel connected to a fictional character in ways I hadn't felt before, and just like with his split personality beforehand, I couldn't help but worry about him before my common sense got a hold of me again and reminded me that it wasn't real. Even still, I couldn't help but wonder about myself and what I would do if I'd been Zack or Emily. How strong would I be in a similar situation? All throughout the week, little things kept making me think of the game, and I would burst into spontaneous tears as if I really had just lost a loved one. And yet, beneath all that melancholy, I was absolutely and utterly thrilled that a video game could carry a story so moving, so impactful, in a way only a video game could do, filled me with all kinds of faith and hope for the medium's future. Which is why I am champing at the bit to put myself through all of that again once the director's cut releases. Or, well, myself only in a technical sense. Sadly, neither myself nor 360 friend owns a PS3, so I'll have to sit this one out. But I know there are droves of people looking to Let's Play the director's cut once it drops, so I'll hopefully re-experience the game the way I got into it in the first place, through a Let's Play. And I've heard Swery say he'd love to bring the game to PC if he could, so fingers crossed. Whatever happens, I couldn't be happier that Deadly Premonition is getting the chance it deserves to have decent controls and more streamlined zombie killing and a green veil that actually looks green. But for all my pretentious prattle about story, I'm glad they're not neutering its campy charm. York is still looking happily deranged, and I wouldn't have it any other way.